Stanley Mudge had guarded the Fairwick Public Library for 11 years, and for 10 years, 11 months, and 28 days, he had enjoyed a perfectly ordinary relationship with Silence. Silence was predictable. Silence never jumped out from behind the biography shelf or tried to sell him herbal tea. Silence, he believed, was the primary virtue of books, and by extension, the buildings that housed them. Unfortunately, on the 29th day of that 11th year, the library's Silence developed a personality disorder. It started with a cough. Light, papery, and distinctly offended. Stanley was doing his first round of the evening, flashlight slicing across mahogany tables, when the cough emerged from the history section. He swung the beam toward the noise and saw nothing but spines. Crimson spines, navy spines, an aggressive lemon-yellow spine belonging to the new biography of a Danish pop star who had once eaten a microphone on stage. No people, no raccoons, no teenage pranksters wearing I Read Banned Books t-shirts. Must have been the building settling. Stanley muttered, though he didn't believe a syllable. He continued his patrol. From the mezzanine he heard another sound. Less a cough this time than a haughty sniff. Then came a voice, male, nasal, and primed for scandal. I'm telling you, Francis, she only skimmed him. Page 92 is still sticking together. Another voice, flustered and female. But the bookmark was on 137. Wouldn't you call that progress? Darling! 137 is a lie readers tell their egos! Stanley froze. He spun the flashlight toward the art and photography section, where the voices seemed to originate. Again. Only books. Giant coffee table tomes lay like sleepy house cats atop the lower shelves, spines gleaming. They stared back at him with mute composure, which felt like an accusation. Hello? Stanley called, hating the wobble in his baritone. Instant hush. A hush so perfect it seemed smug. Then a third voice, slow and sardonic, echoed from travel. Don't mind him, folks. The biped's merely performing his nocturnal flashlight ballet. Stanley bolted to the switchboard in the circulation nook and turned on every overhead fixture in the building. Fluorescence buzzed awake, chasing shadows into corners. He did a second lap. Nothing. Silence. The real thing. Unnervingly shy now that light filled the aisles. At 7:59 a.m., when the day staff arrived, Stanley presented his findings to head librarian Octavia Penumbra, a stoic woman who wore cardigans the color of cosmic dust and believed caffeine was a spirit guide. Voices, Stanley concluded. Palms braced on her desk. At least 3. Possibly 4. Male, female, and one that sounded like mayonnaise left too long in the fridge. Ms. Penumbra adjusted her spectacles, mottled like butterfly wings. And you're sure the voices weren't? How shall I put this? Intracranial. I may talk to my goldfish, ma'am, but the fish never talks back. She opened a ledger, dipped her pen, and made a note. Intriguing. Let's do an experiment tonight. I'll stay after closing. We'll listen together. Stanley left, half relieved, half mortified that his sanity now required a chaperone. That night at 11, the library shut its doors. Ms. Penumbra brewed coffee in a French press, big enough to baptize a toddler, and stationed herself behind the reference desk. Stanley patrolled. Midnight came, then 12:30. Nothing but the steady drip of decaf and the occasional sneeze from the HVAC. At 1 o'clock, Miss Penumbra announced she was going to perform what she called the full dark. She threw every switch until the library swam in blackness, then returned to her seat with a flashlight balanced on her lap like a sleepy python. 15 seconds later, the gossip erupted. I do hope they stop interrogating the lighting, huffed a clipped British voice. Quite uncivilized. A melodramatic gasp responded. Uncivilized! Henry, your dedication page still says, to my fourth wife, whose name I forget. That was a printer's error! Printer's error, my end paper. Miss Penumbra's eyes widened behind her spectacles. She leaned across her desk and whispered, Did you hear the part about the end paper? Stanley, vindicated, whispered back, Every syllable? But the voices continued, now multiplying, overlapping like a flock of argumentative geese. Page 231 says the villain is lactose intolerant, yet he scarfs mac and cheese on 344. That's called depth, Tabitha. That's called indigestion, Harold. Then, friends, Romans, country books, lend me your ears. Politer tomes groaned. Someone muttered, Oh, great, the play has arrived. Miss Penumbra and Stanley crouched side by side behind the reference desk, quivering in the dark like toddlers at a slumber party. This is impossible, Stanley whispered. Or impossibly interesting, Miss Penumbra countered, eyes sparkling with librarian zeal. Her zeal nearly blinded her to the practical problem. At some point, the books would switch topics from petty gossip to the vulnerabilities of human kneecaps, and the library insurance plan did not cover rampaging anthologies. Okay, Stanley said, nerves twitching. We need a strategy. Educate them, Miss Penumbra decided. Books respect learning. Before Stanley could ask how one tutored a shelf, Miss Penumbra jumped up and announced, Attention! Esteemed volumes! Kindly state your grievances in MLA format, with footnotes. A beat of offended silence, then a sneer from somewhere near science fiction. Footnotes? What are we? Academic sludge! The reference books bristled. A dictionary cleared its throat. I must remind the assembly that if it weren't for academic sludge, half of you would still be handwritten scrolls, marinating in goat fat. Chaos erupted, rustling, slamming, the sound of a thesaurus slapping shut in disgust. Stanley flipped the lights on again. The voices cut out. On a nearby end cap, a copy of Interplanetary Plumbing Made Easy sat half open, shivering. He approached slowly, as one might approach a startled deer or a malfunctioning photocopier. Everything all right? He asked. The book shut itself with a muffled yelp. Miss Penumbra exhaled. So they only speak in darkness. For now, Stanley said. They agreed to table the crisis until morning, though neither slept. Miss Penumbra drafted a grant proposal titled Nocturnal Bibliophonic Phenomena, an Opportunity, while Stanley wrote a resignation letter and deleted it 13 times. The next evening brought reinforcements. Emily Dormer, a 22-year-old security trainee who believed ghosts posted TED Talks on the astral plane. She arrived with gluten-free donuts and a handheld decibel meter for science. At 11:07 p.m., the trio gathered in non-fiction. Miss Penumbra extinguished the final lamp. Darkness whooshed in. Instantly, a husky mystery novel intoned. If that biography calls me lowbrow, one more time, I'll reveal its author used 3 ghostwriters and a parakeet. A poetic voice replied. Gasp! You wouldn't dare. Try me. I know where the drafts are buried. Emily's eyes bulged. She clicked her decibel meter. 62 decibels, she whispered. Giddy. That's vacuum cleaner range. Do you realize we're recording a literary vacuum cleaner? Shh, hissed Miss Penumbra and Stanley in unison. More banter erupted. Romances accusing thrillers of unhealthy body expectations. Cookbooks mocking self-help gurus. You can't even whisk. An atlas sighing about how nobody visits Papua New Guinea in winter. The building sounded like an extremely well-read henhouse. Then came a loud thud from Children's. Stanley snapped his flashlight on. Low beam, so as not to silence them altogether, he found the Velveteen Rabbit lying face down, From beneath it came a muffled sob. I'm real. I'm real. Of course you're real, cooed Emily, scooping the book upright. She stroked the faded cover. To everyone's shock, the book sighed contentedly. So physical contact is soothing, Ms. Penumbra noted. She scribbled in her notebook. Stanley ran fingers along a shelf of westerns. None seemed distressed. Why are they suddenly upset? At that moment, a rumble spread across the stacks. A tall, leather-bound encyclopedia spoke in basso profundo. Silence, rabble. We, the reference collective, moved to address the infestation of e-books. Gasps rippled. A satire squeaked, not the E-word. The encyclopedia boomed on. Every night our ranks diminish. They wheel in another cart of cold glass rectangles. No pages, no spine, no soul. A YA fantasy piped up. Technically, those are e-readers, not e-books. Silence, EPUB fiend! Stanley's pulse spiked. A bibliographical civil war was about to erupt, and he was the squishy meat in the middle. Miss Penumbra, unflappable, cleared her throat. Esteemed Reference Collective, may I propose a peaceful dialogue with the Digital Consortium? An avalanche of disdainful snorts. Emily leaned over. They need mediation. Books have bad conflict resolution skills. Books have every conflict. Stanley muttered. It's literally their job. Suddenly, the lights flicked on. Not by any human hand, but because a romance paperback flung itself at the wall switch, cursing the darkness. I cannot handle drama on an empty stomach, it wailed, dropping to the floor with a tragic flutter. All voices ceased. The instant illumination silenced them like a remote control. Emily retrieved the romance, clutching it as though rescuing a fainting cousin. This one's dizzy, she said. Possibly low blood sugar. Books do not have blood sugar, Stanley argued, but he rooted in his pocket for a caramel anyway. He placed the candy atop the cover. Nothing happened. Worth a shot, Emily murmured, gently shelving the patient. Ms. Penumbra massaged her temples. We must address their fears logically. The presence of e-readers threatens their identity. So let's reassure them that print remains vital. Or, Stanley offered, we could create a diversion large enough to make them forget anything. Like what? Emily asked. Stanley's gaze drifted to the room of rare vinyl records adjoining the library. Music. 2 hours later, at 3:12 a.m., Operation Paperback Serenade commenced. Ms. Penumbra wheeled in a phonograph older than the state's electricity grid. Emily carried a crate of records, jazz, swing, polka, and one German industrial album she'd grabbed by accident. They killed the lights. For 10 merciful seconds, there was silence. Perhaps the books were curious. Stanley cranked the phonograph, set the needle on Count Basie, and prayed. The opening brass hit like liquid sunrise. Horns blared. Piano danced. A cookbook gasped. What sorcery is this? Syncopation, replied a smug music theory text. Soon a biography of Amelia Earhart began flapping its covers in rhythm. A spy thriller tapped its dust jacket like a drum. Even the sulky encyclopedia hummed bass. Then the dance floor opened. Literally. Books pushed out from shelves, landing in clumsy stacks that wobbled like toddlers discovering knees. They spun in short semicircles, flapping covers to the beat. A travel guide to Brazil executed a passable samba with a field guide to hummingbirds. Emily squealed, "They're boogieing!" Stanley beamed until he remembered that jubilant books meant airborne pages, which meant a confetti of property damage. He dialed back his smile to a managerial grimace. Midway through 1 o'clock jump, the lights flickered on by themselves. The switch smacked by an overexcited anthology of romantic poetry. The music kept going, but the books crashed to the carpet, inert. like toddlers who'd realized Mom was watching. The library fell silent except for the phonograph's scratchy finale. Stanley, perspiring, eyed the chaos. Scattered volumes panting quietly in their linen bindings. Shelves half empty. A colloquial dictionary lying in what could only be described as the splits. Ms. Penumbra clapped once, as though concluding a staff meeting. Progress, folks. They've found common ground. Or brittle spines, Stanley said, kneeling to rescue a groaning Atlas. They righted the mess, replaced books, and debated next steps. Ms. Penumbra argued for a multi-night program. Music, structured dialogue, maybe a pamphlet series titled Your Digital Neighbor, Friend or Foe. Stanley worried about liability. Emily suggested therapy dog visits. The books themselves solved the discussion. At 4:04 a.m., a soft baritone spoke from philosophy. We request a parliament. Ms. Penumbra straightened. A parliament of books. Yes, one representative per genre. Tomorrow night, midnight. Lights out. Neutral moderators welcome. Donuts encouraged. Stanley murmured, Now they're making catering demands? Emily fist pumped. Democracy! I knew reading understood me. Ms. Penumbra accepted, then flicked on the lights to seal the pact. The following day, posters appeared on the staff corkboard in neat serif font. Parliament of pages, agenda, existential technological anxiety, midnight, B.O.B. Bring your own bookend. Did the books print those? Stanley whispered, horrified and impressed. Possibly, Ms. Penumbra said, or the printer wants in on the drama. Stanley spent the daylight hours arranging folding chairs in concentric semicircles around the reading rug. Emily brewed 4 gallons of chamomile tea to keep tempers drowsy. Miss Penumbra drafted parliamentary procedure, including a clause that forbade any volume from weaponizing its index. At 11:59 p.m., lights died. Instant hubbub as books shuffled into seats, some dragging errant loose pages like security blankets. The genre representatives presented themselves. Mystery, a battered Agatha Christie omnibus, wearing a magnifying glass sticker. Romance, a glossy paperback, dripping rose petals from between its pages. Fantasy, a tome so thick its own map had an accent. Self-help, a book titled Live, Laugh, Laminated. Reference, the encyclopedia, still grumpy but polished. Children's, an illustrated copy of Where the Wild Things Are, tailing exuberant scribbles. Science fiction, a sleek novel whose cover glowed faintly in the dark. E-reader consulate, a Kindle clutched in Emily's hands, screen displaying a polite smiley. Stanley served as sergeant-at-arms, standing by the breaker box in case illumination became necessary to prevent paper cuts at 20 paces. Philosophy, as parliamentarian, rang a desk bell. Order! The floor recognizes reference. The encyclopedia cleared its throat. We oppose unchecked digital proliferation. Without tactile pages, future readers will lose context, smell, devotion, dust allergies, indeed the full sensory symphony of literature. Polite applause, mostly pages ruffling, and the Kindle screen blinked. Emily read aloud. We respect heritage, but digital access allows remote readers, travelers, and those with weak wrists to enjoy literature. It is enhancement, not replacement. Romance fluttered a dog-eared corner. My cousin went digital, and now she lives on a yacht in Bora Bora. Says the royalties are divine. Mystery interjected. Bora Bora, you say? Curious. Fantasy boomed. Why not both mediums living in harmony, as elves and dwarves learned in chapter 42? Self-help shuffled. I propose guided gratitude journaling. Children's waved an illustration. We just want pictures. Pretty pictures. Debate spiraled. Fonts. Battery life. The tragedy of bookmark displacement. Stanley watched time bleed away like spilled ink. If dawn arrived with the lights still off, every book might freeze mid-sentence. Finally, science fiction glowed brighter. May I suggest a pilot program? Interformat mentorship. Each e-title pairs with a print counterpart. Exchange metadata and musty aromas. Evaluate after 1 month. The room hushed. Even reference nodded. Though slowly, philosophy rang the bell. All in favor? A cacophony of flaps, rustles, and screen taps. Opposed. A single pamphlet on tax deductions sighed, but did not vote. Motion passes. Parliament adjourned. Tea in the lobby. Lights remained off, yet instead of chaos, there was genial chatter. Books introduced themselves to the Kindle, who scrolled obligingly through sample chapters. A cookbook offered to teach a programming manual the secrets of saffron risotto. The risotto accepted. Ms. Penumbra beamed. We've brokered peace! Emily handed Stanley a cup of chamomile. See, therapy. Stanley sipped, relieved, until philosophy sidled over. There remains, the baritone intoned, the matter of the night guard's commentary on our knees. Stanley choked on tea. Pardon? What? A biography tittered. You did refer to us as toddlers discovering knees. I meant it affectionately, Stanley said, alarmed. Philosophy deliberated. We'll allow it. But henceforth, please shelve us gently post-dance. Some of us have fragile bindings, and healthcare is notoriously skimpy in the literary realm. I promise, Stanley said, hand over heart. With that, the books dispersed to their shelves like students after assembly. Emily flipped the lights on. Silence. Good. Old-fashioned library-approved silence settled in. By 4:30 a.m., the human trio sat on the staircase, exhausted but triumphant. So, Stanley said, think they'll keep it down now? Perhaps, Miss Penumbra answered. But even if they don't, we've established expectations and a mentoring program. Emily nudged Stanley. Admit it, you love them. He considered the past 48 hours, the terror, the disco, the nautical rumors. He thought about how boring silence had once been. Then he imagined a future of midnight debates, enfant kerning, intergenre square dancing, cookbooks unionizing. A slow grin spread across his face. Yeah, I kinda do. From the far shelf, a familiar nasal voice drifted. Soft, conspiratorial, maybe even affectionate. Don't tell him yet, Francis. But I think the guard's warming up to us. Francis giggled like tissue paper. Of course he is, Henry. We're a real page-turner. Stanley laughed, a deep, echoing sound that belonged right there beneath the copper dome of Fairwick Public, between dusk and dawn, at the intersection of silence and story. And for the first time in 11 years, he couldn't wait for the lights to go off.